Mobile hunters, are you looking to make the move to saddle hunting this year? Or maybe you just want to add a few new pieces of gear or upgrade your current saddle gear? If that's the case, then head over to tetherednation.com where they've got all mobile hunters covered. Whether you're new to saddle hunting or an old timer, Tethered is your one-stop saddle shop. From saddles to ropes, sticks, ascenders, whatever it is you need, they have you covered. I've personally been using their gear for the past 3 seasons now. My base setup consists of the Phantom saddle and the Predator platform. And if you're wondering why I've chosen to use their gear above all else, here's the cliff notes. They're innovative and pushing the mobile hunting forward overall. They cut no corners and prioritize the safety and performance of their gear. They care about the community that they've created, and their gear allows me to hunt free. And above all else, I like to support good people doing good work. If you're interested in upping your mobile hunting game, then head to tetherednation.com. This podcast is brought to you by Skull Brew Coffee Company. Skull Brew Coffee roasts premium single origin coffee, guaranteeing to deliver the freshest coffee directly to your doorstep. The kicker, they're 2% for conservation certified and donate 10% of their proceeds back to organizations who support the interests of our hunting community. So go to skullbrewcoffee.com and pick up one of their 3-killer roasts and fuel your hunt and fill more tags with Skull Brew Coffee. Welcome to the Truth from the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast, brought to you by Skull Brew Coffee Company. I'm your host, Clint Campbell, and you're listening to episode number 213. Today, we're cranking up the first DIY Report mini-series of the year with none other than Mr. John Eberhart. So stay tuned. All right. What is up, everyone? Happy Wednesday to you. Hope you are doing well. Hope you are feeling fine. Here we are at the mid to later end of January. And for most of us, the hunting season's probably over. I have a few weeks here left in PA. I shouldn't say a few weeks. I don't know exactly what the date is today. But the end of the month is whenever the season runs out for me here in PA. So I might be able to get out one more time before everything's kind of shuts down. Didn't get a chance to get out this weekend. This time of year is when I start to kind of shift my focus and kind of start taking care of things around the house to get myself back in good graces for the upcoming season, or maybe even more specifically, maybe the upcoming scouting trips and stuff like that, during the hunting season. Like a lot of the normal tasks, duties, etc., that kind of fall underneath my responsibility at the house go undone or pushed to the back burner between the months of, I don't know, let's say for me, probably like mid-September through Christmas timeframe probably is a fair kind of time frame where, it's the bare minimum around the house while I'm out into the timber trying to chase critters around. So this time of year, once you get through the holidays and you get into January, I can usually get out for some hunts here and there. But the wife definitely is looking for me to kind of pick back up the household duties that I typically was doing, prior to hunting season. Not to mention that, or beyond that, I think I've mentioned on this show before, I typically am gone during her birthday, because it falls during the course of, usually during my trips whenever I'm out of state. So usually what happens is this time of year is also the time where I make good on being gone and end up taking a weekend away to show her the appreciation that I have for her allowing me to do the things that I like to do kind of untethered, because she's awesome. She lets me do what I want to do. She doesn't complain ever whenever I'm gone. And so, I have nothing to complain about in that regard. My wife is pretty killer. Not that this episode's turned into like a wife love fest, but we ended up going away this past weekend into the Poconos and stayed at this really cool place and just kind of had a weekend away, which was nice. Also kind of nice just to kind of get away and reset after the season and just kind of not think about hunting for a weekend and just kind of spend some time drinking some good wine, hanging out, eating some good food, and just having a nice kind of relaxing weekend. But with that, we're back on the grind. We're back on Whitetails, and I'm super excited for this DIY Report mini-series. First one of the year. We'll do a couple of these throughout the year. This one's with John Eberhart. If you remember, I don't even remember. I think it was like in the 140s or something like that of the episode series. We did a DIY report series with John where we talked a lot about, hunting primary scrapes, scrape areas, how he, defines his access routes and stuff like that. If you've not listened to any of those, I would urge you to go back and listen to those because those were really great episodes. And we're doing another DIY report series, mini series here with John Eberhart, where we're going to focus on a few things just a little bit differently. The first one that you're going to hear today, the one we're launching today, is really around late season. Now I know, you're probably saying, hey, late season's either past or almost past. But what I would say is that it's always kind of important as we're thinking about future seasons to try to sharpen our tools. And late season is something I've really not talked to John a lot about, and John has a lot of experience when it comes to late season hunting, especially in high pressured areas, and kind of has a specific way as he likes to go about it. You'll hear us talk a little bit about hunting mornings, which is something that's not. I would say is not common for late season, is not common, in terms of what you would read in media outlets, what you would see written in, magazines, or even what you would hear people talk about. It's always evenings. And John has a specific way about hunting mornings. And I think mornings are becoming more and more popular to a degree. There's ways to get it done in relationship to that. But his is very specific on what the setup is, where they're bedding, where they're feeding, and what your access looks like. So we talk a little bit about that today and just cover his kind of game plan for late season, especially if he's going to travel a little bit out of state. He's looking for snow to be on the ground. And he has kind of rhyme and a reason as to why he wants that. But the two other sessions, this is going to be a 3-part series with John. This is part 1, late season. The other 2 parts are, one is how he plans an out-of-state hunt. A lot of how I hunt out of state is attributed to, John's approach overall. I've picked up a lot of things from him. He's been traveling out of state for years and doing that game, probably long before it became popular. He's got, deer on the wall to kind of show for it. And then the other part that I wanted to talk to him about, which is, I think it's the second part actually, is his off-season approach to scouting. John has a very kind of meticulous way as to how he goes about his approach to scouting post-season. He really doesn't do anything prior to the season, as you would call like preseason scouting, like the summer, stuff like that. John kind of wraps everything up in the months of March and April, unless he happens to get a new piece of property, a piece of knock-on-door permission or something like that, where he didn't have prior to the season. He might go in and scout it then. But by and large, John gets everything done in the months of March and April, and he has a very kind of specific way as to how he goes about it and how he sets up his areas and how he goes about scouting a piece. He talks about that as well. He also has a workshop that he puts on every March, every spring, and he mentions it at the end of this, where he does do a thing where you can come out and spend a day with him and watch how he scouts, and he'll go through like his process and how he sets up his saddle locations and stuff like that. So if you're interested in that, be sure to just Google him and you can find his workshops and sign up for that. But before we jump into today's podcast, a couple things to provide you just quick reminders of. One is if you're planning out of state hunts, like I do, I'm always kind of bogged down with trying to remember what the application dates are for different lottery drawings, when I need to get, buy points, all those types of things. And if you're doing it across multiple states, it gets really confusing. For me, it's this year at least, it's Kansas, Iowa, and then, for deer at least, and then I might be throwing in some turkey hunts and stuff like that, and, out west. And so it gets to be a lot. And so what I ended up doing was signing up for Hunt Reminder to send me reminders for all the application deadlines that I need to hit, because I've missed deadlines in the past that ended up screwing my hunting situation for a given fall. So if you're not sure what Hunt Reminder is, it's an application period and lottery reminder service. And they have a database of 470 different application periods across the U.S. and Canada. And it ranges from big game to small game, migratory birds. It also includes preference points, public land drawings, youth hunts, basically whatever you need to know in terms of application period for any type of hunt. They will be able to provide you those reminders. So when users sign up, they can select which application periods they'd like to get reminders for. Like I mentioned, I'm looking at Kansas and Iowa for deer, and then maybe Iowa for turkey. You'll get a text message or an email notification when your application period opens up. So whatever state it is, whatever species it is, as soon as the application period opens, you'll get an email or a text reminder from Hunt Reminder. When there's 1 week left, you'll get a reminder, and then also you'll get another reminder when there's 24 hours remaining in that application period. So it also provides a direct link to online applications within those reminders as well, so you can easily get to where you need to be in order to sign up. Hunt Reminder only costs $19.99 for an annual subscription. That's not a month. That's an annual subscription, which comes out to just about $1.67 per month. But right now, users can use the promo code TRUTH for $5 off their first year, bringing the total down for your whole year to just $14.99. Join thousands of other hunters who rely on Hunt Reminder by going to huntreminder.com and signing up today. Your next tag is waiting. Also, one other quick reminder is that I do have Truth from the Stand merch. You can find the link to that on my Instagram profile. Go to the link in bio, and it will be in there. It says Truth Merch. Go ahead and check that out, or you can go to truthfromthestand.com, and there should be a merch tab there as well. You can click on that. I've got some T-shirts, some sweatshirts, coffee mugs. Pick up some Truth merch. I'd be super appreciative if you'd pick some stuff up. It always helps kind of me to propel this podcast forward. So with that, we will go ahead and jump into today's podcast with John Eberhart, talking all about late season hunting. As always, thank you all for listening. All right, folks, welcome back to another episode of the Truth from the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast. And today I have a gentleman on the phone who needs no introduction. I think this might be the fourth time that we've had you on, John, but I'm speaking with none other than Mr. John Eberhart. How you doing, man?
Hey, Clint, I'm doing great. And thanks for the opportunity to talk to all my fellow bow hunters out there.
That's right, man. I always enjoy talking to you, whether it's on the podcast or whether we're just having a phone call. Like you are, I don't know. It's a breath of fresh air when I talk to you. Maybe that's a way to, maybe that's a way to say it. Yeah, man. You're always a straight shooter, and you're always down to help provide information if I have questions or whatever the case is, man. And I'm always appreciative of that. And you don't sugarcoat it for me. If I'm doing something stupid, you'll tell me, so.
I definitely do not sugarcoat things. I piss off a lot of people because I tell it the way it is.
Well, hey, yeah. you will find no enemies here of the truth. So you've got a good audience here, but I'm currently drinking a little glass of bourbon. So I'm having a good evening. I'm settled in. I'm going to talk deer hunting with John Eberhart. I'm not sure how much better my night could get, quite possibly. So with that,
I could think of better ways. I could think of better.
Well, in the context of what I've got going on at the very moment, I think I'm topped out, is what I'm saying.
Okay.
Cool. But what we're going to do here, folks, for all you guys out there listening, I've done a couple of series with John in the past where we talked about different approaches to how he approaches different parts of the season and the type of things he looks for during those parts of the season. I think it was a 3-part series we did. And so what we're going to do here is we're going to kick off another 3-part series, a DIY report mini series with John. He's been gracious enough to give us some of his time to kind of talk through a couple topics. And really what we're going to hit on in part 1 is we're going to talk about hunting high pressure areas during the late season. Part 2 of this session is going to be really about John's process of how he goes about doing his postseason scouting. And if you're familiar with him at all, it's primarily all public land or knock on door free permission. So this is not managed lands and things of that nature that are manicured for deer hunting. He's hunting just like the rest of us. And the third one is going to be how John goes about planning out of state hunts. This last two, the postseason hunting and the out of state hunt thing, is really where I've got a lot of my information, and I follow a very similar process. So I've learned a lot from John. I think you guys can learn a lot from him in these regards too. So with that, John, if you're game, man, we'll just go ahead and get jumped into the into late season if you're down with it. Sound good?
Let's do it.
Let's do it, man. So as I mentioned, man, I've learned a ton from you, throughout the years. Some of which because we've spoke, either on the podcast or offline. I've read some of your books and so forth, consumed videos that you've done, and a lot of the way I hunt is based off of a lot of things I've learned from you, especially when it comes to hunting that mid-October and into that rut phase kind of time period, focusing on destination locations, active scrapes, things like that, right? But what is your base method for trying to find success in late season, especially for guys out there that are hunting in these high pressured states like Michigan and Pennsylvania?
Go to another state.
Great answer. Everyone, that is the end of part 1. We thank you for listening. I'm just kidding.
That's the reality. That's the reality answer. I mean, I've been bow hunting 53 seasons in Michigan, and I think I've shot 3 bucks in December out of 31. And, we've got, in New York and PA, West Virginia, all the states up in the Northeast where there's heavy population. They're all in the same boat, basically. They have just a lot of gun season. We've got an early gun season in September. We've got a youth gun season in September. We've got November 15th through the end of November rifle season. And then the whole month of November, we've got a 10-day muzzleloader season. And then the rest of the month is gun season for does. So there's so much pressure after November 15th. And we've got, 700,000 gun hunters, 320,000 bow hunters. And a buck that's 3.5 years old and older, they just, to be perfectly honest, if you don't have the right type of property, the right type of bedding area, the right type of security cover, the odds of getting an opportunity in daylight hours for a mature buck to move during daylight hours is very, very slim.
Right.
Now there are places in Michigan where people own a lot of property and they manage it like TV guys do, and those guys see deer in December because they're not shooting a deer till they're 3 or 4 years old. So obviously, by the time they reach the kill status, they're moving in daylight a lot. So,
right.
but our bucks get targeted when they're 1.5 years old. The bucks on public land and knock on doors.
Mm-hmm.
When they got their first set of antlers, they're getting targeted. So, as 2 and 3 year olds, they're just extremely smart and they're just very good at avoiding hunters. And once there's that much gun pressure, they just don't move during daylight. It's just so rare, but I still love doing it. I love hunting in December. A couple weeks ago, I think it was the last week in December, we got this fresh snow. It was like 25 degrees and the snow was in the trees. And I had no interest in shooting a deer, but I just went bow hunting because it was just so gorgeous outside.
Right. Yeah. No, I hear you for sure.
Yeah. So, I love hunting in December, but if you're not hunting property that has the adequate security cover, you've got to be in if you're hunting out of trees, you've got to have a big enough diameter tree. You can hide behind it. You've got to be hidden in the tree. If you're hunting something between a bedding and feeding, it's got to have really good, security cover between the bedding area and the feeding area. It's just very, very difficult,
right.
As you well know.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about that.
It can be done. It can be done.
Yes, it can be done. I don't want to make it sound for folks out there like it's an impossibility, but and I totally agree with you. I experience the same stuff here in Pennsylvania where, even just when I'm monitoring trail cameras, the activity just in that regard is just drastically different. And when it does happen, it's at night, or what I'm really kind of seeing right now, because I have some cell cameras out in some of my kind of prime spots, and really just seeing 1.5 year old deer moving around. And that's about it. I'm not even seeing does at this point. I saw a young 1.5 year old deer check this one scrape, was one lonely scrape. He's out still trying to find some love. You know what I mean? So,
is he 1.5 year old antlered buck?
Yeah. He's just a little, what we would refer to as a Michigan or Pennsylvania 11 point.
Yeah. Okay. Yep.
Yeah, just a youngster. But when you're mentioning that right type of security cover, because I think for me, that was a big thing for me, and as I evolved as a hunter, following a lot of the stuff that you talk about, especially when it was in October and, pre-rut and rut kind of phase. But when you're talking about the right type of security cover or bedding during late season, given that can look vastly different from October to when you get to December, just based on how the foliage changes in the timber between those times. So give me an example of what you would deem, or the type of habitat you would deem to be good security cover or bedding for late season.
Probably the best spot you could have in a state like Michigan, and I don't know what you have in PA. I've never hunted PA. Is cedar swamps. Because cedar swamps are relatively dense. It's low ground. There's a lot of weeds. Typically, cedars grow low to the ground unless they're browsed up high. And so you not only have a bedding area, you also have a feeding zone. Mm-hmm. So if you can get in something like a cedar swamp where they have a food source there as well, or if you're in just a heavy marsh grass or cattail marshy area, swamp where you have to cross a river to get back to it, so you're leaving your other public land people behind, and there's, let's say, some oaks, an island of oaks or an area of oaks where there's still acorns on the ground. Mm-hmm. There's still a chance that you could potentially get an opportunity at a mature buck in December. And all three of the book bucks in Michigan, and I've shot several other monster bucks out of state in December in Illinois and Ohio. Mm-hmm. But all of them I've shot in Michigan were in dense bedding areas where there was also natural food sources in the bedding area. Because a mature buck in a Michigan, PA, they just are not going to be fooled. I mean, baiting's banned here now, and I wasn't baiting anyway. But they just don't get. There's a lot of people here that still bait. They just don't get fooled by anything man-made, like food plots and stuff like that. Of course, on public and knock-on doors, you never have that anyway. But the mature bucks, they just don't get fooled by that. They're going to feed at natural destination locations, and it's got to be in heavy security cover. And it's always going to be on a morning hunt because you can't enter those places on an afternoon hunt because you're spooking deer with your entry. So you got to get in there, and I'm in there usually late season. I'm in there probably 2 hours before daylight as opposed to an hour and a half. During regular season, I'm probably an hour and a half in my tree before daylight. But by the late season, they actually go into their bedding security cover areas a little earlier than normal. So I like to get in there really, really early. Wow. And obviously, if it butts up to some form of an ag field, or if you got an ag field close by, you can't enter through the ag. You got to come in through the backside into the bedding area.
Right. That's interesting that you call out mornings, right? Because I think this is probably a big miss for a lot of guys that hunt public land if they're being sold the bag of goods that the big hunting media sells you, which is like you can't hunt mornings in late season. It's all evenings on destination food sources, right? But we don't have that, right? And so I think that's a really that's a really good point right there. Is like for the public land guy, the DIY public land guy, if you're in a high pressure state, mornings are probably your best option because you need to be in tight close to bedding because you don't have those like I think what I'm noticing, John, around here, and I do have like the one area that I have been hunting a little bit during late season is around a cedar swamp. It's near this piece of water, and during pre-rut and rut I was kayaking in and I was having some some good encounters or some good hunts in that situation, but it's all surrounded, that primary scrape area is all surrounded by cedar swamp essentially. And I went in and hunted the opposite side of it during late season, and that was where I was finding all of like the deer scat and doe tracks and stuff like that, because on the edges of those cedar swamps was just a pile of greenbrier. And so they're able to bed and eat basically within a 50-yard area, that they never have to expose themselves during daylight. And I'm sure that's probably what you're kind of experiencing in Michigan too. Is that right?
At 100%, you're absolutely correct. And it's kind of interesting because, like when I went to Ohio and I shot a big buck a couple years ago, I blew off morning hunt. Mm-hmm. The property was not conducive to morning hunting because it had a lot of ag on it. So there's no way I could enter any of my locations before daylight without spooking deer in the ag areas, because the bedding areas were small enough I couldn't get in them without spooking deer feeding in the vicinity. Right. And obviously there was snow on the ground and the snow was crunchy, so it made noise. So it was very obvious of my entry. And then I hunted another spot in Ohio 3 years ago. I didn't kill anything, but that was a really interesting hunt. That was in December. And we didn't have any snow. When I say we, because I always do this by myself. Right. There wasn't any snow on the ground, and all the leaves were really crunchy because it was getting down into the low 20s at night. So I prepped a couple trees, and then the very first morning I went in, I just blew all the deer out of the area. I could hear them running up in front of me. So from that point on, and I was in some oaks. From that point on, I didn't hunt mornings. And what I would do is I'd get up at like 8 o'clock because I had 3 trees prepped. I would get up at 8 o'clock and I would go to all 3 of these locations. So the deer were already out of the area from my tree. They were beyond that, but they were still bedded within probably 200 to 300 yards from my tree location. So by me entering through that crunchy snow, I was actually spooking the deer. I could actually hear the deer running, 200-300 yards up to a quarter mile, and I could see flags going through the timber way up in front of me, and it was kind of hill country. And I was spooking the deer out of there each morning, so that when I would go back in the evening, there would be such a big gap between when I spooked them back into the heavier cover back deeper in, that they would still potentially come out and get to me by the evening, because there's not as much pressure there. So those deer down there were moving during daylight hours.
Right.
And I passed up a couple 110 inchers. There wasn't anything I wanted to shoot, but I totally abandoned morning hunts. And then the time I did shoot that 150 incher in that ag area, I abandoned morning hunts there as well, and I shot that buck in the evening.
Yeah,
so it's just the opposite of what I typically do here in Michigan.
Yeah, I think that's the important takeaway, right? It's like you kind of have to contextualize it with the property that you're hunting. It's
absolutely.
like it's all
100%.
Yeah, it's like what's good for the goose may or may not be good for the gander, just depending on what the situation is.
People don't understand that. Everything is dictated by the property you're hunting, the amount and type of pressure it gets, and the situation at the time. Crunchy snow, or when you go out. That was stupid on me to go out there without looking at the weather report, because typically when I go out of state, I like to go when there's a nice fresh snow so I can move around quietly. But that time it was crunchy, and it was stupid on my part for doing that.
Right. Well, it worked out with it. Well, at least the one time it worked out, right, with the big deer. So, you mentioned snow, right? So late season, I'm trying to figure out how to ask this. Is there any specific kind of weather conditions that you have noticed, and maybe you didn't kill on that hunt, or that you actually saw more movement than you would have typically seen? Was there any type of, whether it was during a snow, after a rain, crazy freezing temperatures, whatever the case was, is there anything that you've kind of been able to point to that says, hey, when it does this during late season, this is probably the best opportunity I'm going to have just in general of seeing deer move?
Deep snow and right after a snowfall. Or even during. I mean, that 160-inch 12-point I shot in Illinois on public land in mid-December, it was 2 days after their gun season ended. I shot him, and it was about a 35-mile-an-hour wind, and it was 7 degrees. That wasn't the wind chill. It was 7 degrees without the wind chill.
That's brutal.
Damn cold. Yeah. I've told this story so many times, I'm sure everybody's heard it, but I got in this tree, and I had on 5 body warmers. I had 2 Rivers West ambush jackets on with sunlock underneath. I mean, I was dressed for it.
Right.
And I kept my nose, because I'm hunting out of a saddle, and I kept my nose right against the tree on the downwind side of the tree, so otherwise my eyes would water if I was exposed to that cold wind.
Yep.
And about a half hour before dark, I was like, why am I even sitting here? There was a locust tree next to me about 17 yards, and the deer had been tearing that locust tree up. But I'm sitting there thinking, why am I sitting in this wind and this cold? No deer is going to move. And I almost got down like a half hour before dark, and I'm like, well, I might as well just sit here till dark, for God's sake. I only got a half an hour.
Right.
I saw 2 bucks. I had a small 10-point come through, and then that 12-point came through with 3 does, and just before dark, and I shot the 12-point.
Yeah,
that shocked me.
Yeah, it's interesting, because it's one of the things that I've heard from a couple different guys that I've talked to, just about late season hunting, and it seems like, and I learned this from a gentleman who actually had he studied deer, and he had a captive herd for a bunch of years, and what he was basically saying was that, the misconception is that they need to get up and feed, and he's like, it's not really true. And actually, I listened to, I think, some guys that are deer biologists, I think from MSU, talked about this, and they were essentially saying like, hey, their body has evolved over time, or has evolved to where the only way they survive the winters, especially when you get into like northern areas that have a lot of snow and stuff, is that their body almost goes into hibernation, where they don't need as much caloric intake to survive. It's also why they don't move and why they herd up, because they're trying to share body heat, and they just aren't going to try to put out as many calories as possible so they can conserve, because they don't want to have to move to go eat, and food is scarce, right? So, his point was that people think that deer need to go feed, and he's like, and it's just not true. He's like, they need to go feed when the temperature gets as nasty as it can possibly be. He's like, that's when you'll see every mature buck, regardless of the time, hitting like a food source somewhere, whether for public land guys, whether it's, an oak tree that still has some, oak or some acorns on the ground,
browse or green leaves on brush,
whatever it is. He had the luxury of observing, because he had a captive herd that he was studying, so he was like, every deer, it didn't matter what, and he also hunted some ag land, and so he would also kind of compare it to what he was seeing just generally in his area or whatever. But he was like, the nastier the weather, he's like, I'm in the tree. He was like, you give me a day, it's basically what you had. He's like, where it's in like the single digits with wind chill in the minuses, that's snowing or raining or something, he was like, that is the day you're going to see the most mature deer move in daylight. He's like, because they have to.
Yep. I agree with that. And
yeah.
it was a blizzard. It was snowing too. The snow was going sideways. And in the year before that, I shot a 120-inch 9-point from the same exact location,
right.
Coming into that locust tree, and it was the same. It wasn't windy. But it was probably 20 degrees, and I saw 2 different bucks come in and eat those locust beans. I think when you get an extended period of cold weather, they have a lot more need to feed. If you just get a short term, they got body fat and they can withstand that.
Right.
But that's one reason. That's one thing I want when we talk about postseason scouting. That's one reason I want people to wait until the snow melts if you live in a northern state before you go in postseason scouting, because the sign in the snow is irrelevant to fall movement, because a lot of times deer will totally change the area they're bedding, get down in lower ground out of the wind and closer to a feeding location.
Right.
Because they're not being pressured anymore.
Right.
And that's one other thing I do when I'm going out of state. Typically, I don't go out of state unless there's snow in the forecast. And a lot of times these park, a lot of the Ohio, Illinois, a lot of those parks, they have park rangers, and you can actually call them and ask them if they got the snow. And if they did, then when you go down there, because my van's always loaded, you're looking at sign that was left within the last 24 hours. And by mid to late December, deer are in a relatively routine movement pattern.
Right. Right. So that's interesting. So in Michigan too, like, are you prioritizing hunts if you can around snowfalls and stuff like that, just so you can kind of see where they're moving? Because if to that point, if they're habitual beasts, if you will, at that time of season, right, outside of like pressure, right? So if they're going from point A to point B and you can kind of get one set of tracks and you see it, it's probably going to be pretty solid evidence going forward, even when the snow melts. Is that something you kind of subscribe to?
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. 100%. The only downside in Michigan is that sign left during the daylight or after dark. Because all the sign in the world is irrelevant if it's made after dark.
Right, but if you can see where they're going back to bed, then you've got your play for the morning.
Yeah, and then that's also your knowledge comes into fruition there, because if you've been hunting a long time, you can just tell based on the area you're hunting and the amount and type of pressure it's getting, if there's adequate security cover where these travel routes are for daytime movement by a mature buck that you may want to kill.
Right.
All that stuff has to go into the equation.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not just the tracks alone. And if you're not familiar, it's pulling up a map and looking with all the, map technology and stuff. Like, you can get a pretty good visual and kind of tell, like, when you see tracks and look and be like, all right, well, they're headed this way. Well, what's the next best set of bedding cover? Well, let's go look at that. Maybe I go set up there. Right. And that's kind of the game. But I know we were just talking about super cold weather, man. And like you were talking about, you're like, am I crazy or what? I'm sitting out in this tree. It's like 7 degrees with a minus wind chill, snow blowing, face is freezing. I think part of the thing that people underestimate during late season is just the simple fact of staying warm, right? Like, you got to be in the tree to be in the game, right? So do you have any kind of like John Eberhart's tricks, tips, and tactics that you've developed over the years?
The last 2 years, I've been using grabber body warmers for years.
Yeah.
They're adhesive body warmers. They're air activated, and I put them on my kidneys and in my sternum, on my base, over my base garments when I start to get cold. And they only get to like 142 degrees, so they're made for patients with arthritis, and so they have a very controlled heat. It's not like taking a hand warmer or a toe warmer and putting it inside where you're going to end up burning yourself, because they're totally controlled by how much air they get.
Right.
So these body warmers are great, but the last 2 years I've been using these heated vests, and they are bad ass. That's all I've got to say. They are bad.
So
bad is in good.
Right. Bad is in like how the kids say good now, right?
Oh my God. I just got another one. I've got 3 of them. I've got 2 of them that are made by Stuntlock, and I don't like them. They're called reactors. They're $200 retails by Stuntlock. They don't come with batteries. They're 5 volt, but they shut off after 45 minutes. They work phenomenally well, and they have insulation in the body of the vest. But they shut off after 45 minutes, and I hunt out of a saddle. And usually your vest is going to be just above my base garment, which is going to be typically some kind of merino wool.
Right.
So I've always got something else over my vest, and then my scent lock over top of that. And plus I've got a saddle on, so it's coming up a little bit around my side.
Mm-hmm.
So when the vest shuts off after 45 minutes, it's hard to, because I'm in my signature saddle, I overlap the two panels, so I actually have access to get up into my pocket in that vest underneath. But it's still difficult because it's underneath my two other layers.
Right.
And I just think it's ridiculous for something to have an automatic 45-minute shutoff. If I want to turn it off, I ought to be able to turn it off myself. I'm an adult. I bought the damn thing.
Right. Right. So which one do you have that you really like that you think works well?
I just bought one, and I don't remember the name of it. It was $89. I bought it online. It came with a 10,000 amp 5-volt battery, and it's actually cool because it's got two controls. They all have controls on the upper breast of one of the sides. This particular one, it's Hudson or Hadson or something like that. I've got it downstairs. I'll grab it when we switch gears into the next show, or unless you want me to get it now.
No, that's fine. We can grab it and we'll just pick it up when we start the next one. Yeah.
But anyway, they have these heated vests. They have carbon filaments in them. And so this one has one carbon filament that goes around the back of the collar, which is really awesome. It's just a light heat, which is all you need on the back of your neck. But it's got two big panels in the back, and it's got 3 panels in the front, and it's got a button for each side. So it's got a button that controls the front panels, and it's got a button that controls the back panels and the little carbon fiber in the collar of your vest. I'm telling you what, they are. And it was only $89 online. They are unbelievable.
Yeah,
unbelievable.
I'm gonna definitely need to know what that is, because that's I would like to definitely check those out, just because I'm always kind of a nut about trying to keep my. I like to wear as little clothing as possible when I go hunt. And
that'll cut down at least 1 to 2 layers.
Yeah, because a lot of times I'll go in and I'll know that I'm going to be cold just because I don't want to wear extra stuff, or I don't want to carry extra stuff with me. And so I would like to be able to do something like that. I mean, I use the trick that you were talking about with the pads on my kidneys and on my chest and stuff like that. It actually saved my rear end when I was in Iowa last year, because I had some days where the morning it was like minus 15, and I was going to be out all day. And the only way I was going to stay out was just trying to keep those critical organs functioning at optimum capacity, or else I was going to be in trouble. But yeah, something like a heated vest would be awesome to kind of explore just for that reason.
You have got to buy a heated vest. Nice. Everybody should own. If you hunt in a northern state, you definitely need to invest in a heated vest.
All right. So with that, man, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I said absolutely, and everybody thinks that I'm in bed with scent lock, and I am not, because I just said the scent lock ones, I got them really, really cheap because I'm on their pro staff. But I don't like the scent lock ones. I like the other ones that are a lot less money better, because I don't like the 45-minute shutoff on the reactor vest the scent lock makes.
Right. Yep. So with that, man, let's wrap this one up. Is there anything? Well, before that, is there anything else for late season you can think of that we didn't touch on that you think is important?
Well, if anybody's going to go out late season, I just suggest focus everything on security, cover, and food. Mm-hmm. If there's no food, and if you've got property and you don't have a bedding area on it, you're wasting your time. You are 100% wasting your time hunting it, unless you're on a managed property. Managed properties, you can get away with murder and do lots of things. But if you're on regular knock on doors and public land, if there's not a bedding area, where you're planning on hunting, or very, very close within a couple hundred yards, and you got good security transition cover to where you're going, you are 100% wasting your time. Or if you're hunting in you see a lot of these YouTube videos now, these guys up in saddles, 18, 20 feet off the ground in a 14-inch diameter tree. Mm-hmm. If you're hunting in a PA or a Michigan or a New York, you're going to get picked. When the foliage is down, you are going to get picked. Yeah. Period.
Yep. Agreed. The only thing I would add to that is don't throw out mornings. That would be it.
What?
I say the only thing I would add to that is don't throw out mornings during late season.
Oh, definitely don't throw out mornings. No, definitely not.
Awesome, man.
Depends on the area.
Right, exactly. So with that, man, I think we can shut this episode down. Before we change gears here, why don't you let folks out there know where they can find out more about you and what you have going on?
Okay. You want me to tell them something?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Okay. Well, I've written some books. I sell them on my website at deer-john.net, DEER-john.net, or you just Google my name and it'll pop up. Doing these whitetail workshops. They're just about full. I've only got a few openings left in those, but that information's on my website as well. And my sons, John and Joe, and I started a YouTube channel a few months ago, and it's doing very, very, very well. Going to have a lot of scouting stuff coming up in the next couple of months on it, and a lot of saddle stuff coming up on it. And I also have a new signature saddle called Eberhardt Signature Saddle being sold through Tethered. They're out of stock right now. They sold out of everything they had right away. But anyway, they'll be back in stock with that pretty quick, and that's about it.
Awesome. Yeah. So go check them out. Give them a sub on YouTube. Check out the saddle. I highly recommend the books. I've been a reader of those, and be sure if you're in the area and you're looking to get some more knowledge on scouting, the workshop is definitely worth your time and dollars spent to spend some time with Mr. Eberhart. So awesome. So we will go ahead and shift gears to the next episode. All right, folks, that is a wrap for today's show. I'd like to thank you all for listening, and just following up on what John was mentioning, that was a Walston vest that he was referring to that he really liked. So if you guys are interested, go ahead and check that out. Also, if you haven't yet, please head over to iTunes and leave us a 5-star rating. While you're at it, head over to YouTube and give us a sub. Be super appreciative if you do those couple things for me. And before I shut this thing down, I need to give a big shout out to the partners who continue to help us make this podcast possible. Tethered, Exodus Outdoor Gear, Skull Brew Coffee Company, and Maven Optics. And until next time, we'll see y'all.